Dunearn House is definitely one of the most anticipated launches in 2026. As the very first private condominium within the massive Turf City transformation, many buyers see this as a rare chance to enter Singapore's next major township early. But here's the big question. Does being the first always means better returns? Or could buyers simply be paying a premium for a story that may take 20 to 30 years to fully happen? In today's video, let's take a deep dive into Dunearn House and find out whether this project is really worth considering. Here's what we'll be covering today. First, let's try to understand what Turf City is all about and why this master plan is so important. And next, we'll look at some of the common myths that every buyer should know and the assumptions that most buyers have about Dunearn House. We'll also be discussing the pricing prediction, and finally, I'll also be covering the floor plan analysis and project details in the next video. And before we talk about Dunearn House, right, let's first look at a bigger picture of the Turf City. Because buying here isn't just about the project itself, you are buying into an entire neighborhood that's set to evolve over the next 20 to 30 years. And whether this transformation succeeds or takes longer than expected could have a bigger impact on your future returns. And where exactly is Turf City? Turf City is located in the heart of the prestigious Bukit Timah area, an area that's well known for landed homes, low density and exclusivity. So however, over the next 20 to 30 years, this entire area here will be transformed into a new residential district with up to 20,000 homes. So you can see from this diagram itself, right, there will be upcoming private and public housing as well. And this also means that Dunearn House is not only just competing against today's Bukit Timah. Instead, it will be competing with tomorrow's Turf City, which will look very different from what we see today. There will also be HDB built in the Turf City areas. And this direction here is actually looking towards the Bukit Timah Nature Reserve, Upper Pierce Reservoir and MacRitchie Reservoir directions. Whereas towards your left side is towards the Beauty World and King Albert Park area. And right opposite the Turf City is actually the Bukit Timah entire landed enclave area. And towards the right side will be the Tan Kah Kee and Hwa Chong Botanical Garden area. And if you look at Singapore's recent developments, the government has been building new townships such as Tengah, Lentor and Bayshore. So why is Turf City being developed? So basically, I think there are three main reasons. The first reason is actually to meet Singapore's future housing needs. Around 15,000 to 20,000 new homes will be built. And of course, this transformation here will not happen overnight. It could take out at least 20 to 30 years to make it fully happen. And second, this project actually brings the public housing back to the Bukit Timah area. In fact, there hasn't been a new HDB project in Bukit Timah for at least 40 years. And this allows more Singaporeans to live in an area traditionally dominated by private housing. And the third reason is to encourage a more car-like lifestyle, similar to what we see in Tengah and Bayshore area. Turf City will have extensive walking path and cycling path. Together with 6th Avenue and Turf City MRT, residents may rely less on cars and enjoy a more convenient and sustainable lifestyle. By the way, if you are considering Dunearn House and would like a copy of the floor plans, pricing analysis, or want to know which stacks I personally think have better potential, feel free to reach out to me. I'll be happy to share my research with you. And I will also be sharing my floor plan analysis in the upcoming video. So stay tuned and subscribe to my channel to receive more updates. And from this diagram itself, the building shown in the black will be the one that the government will be preserving. And Turf City actually has a lot of history. Instead of tearing everything down, 22 heritage buildings will be preserved. And the iconic grandstands will be kept and integrated into the new estate. And one thing that I personally find very interesting is the idea of the 10 minutes neighborhood. The idea is very simple because the government wants to ensure the residents able to reach the parks, schools, transport nodes and daily amenities within just a short walk or cycle from home. So if done well, this could make the area very convenient and highly livable for future. Alright, so let us take a look at some of the artist's impression right now. And the image that you are seeing on the left, right, is actually the artist's impression of how the North Grandstand may look like in the future, within just 5 minutes walks from the future Turf City MRT. Residents can already enjoy sports facilities, recreation spaces, and daily amenities. Personally, what excites me the most is not just the new homes, but the preservation of the iconic grandstands. Instead of demolishing them, this building here will be transformed into the lifestyle and community spaces, giving Turf City a unique identity that many new townships may not have. So where exactly is Dunearn House located? As you can see from this map, the project sits right within the future Turf City transformation area. It is just within 5 minutes walks to the 6th Avenue MRT, and reputable schools and future amenities will likely be some of its bigger selling points. As we all know, a good location alone doesn't always guarantee strong returns, and that brings us to the first myth. Let's talk about some common myths that I've been hearing from the buyers. The first myth is this: because it is in Bukit Timah, close to MRT station and surrounded by all the prestigious schools, many people assume that it simply can't go wrong. And now, don't get me wrong, Bukit Timah remains one of the Singapore's most desirable residential areas. History has shown us that location alone does not automatically guarantee strong returns. Entry price still matters, and in some cases, paying too much, even for a prime location, can significantly reduce your upside. And to better understand this, I extracted the historical price trends. Instead of looking at the entire market over the last 10 years, I decided to just focus on year 2020. So why year 2020? Because buyers back then had plenty of choices across CCR, RCR, and OCR markets. More importantly, enough time has passed for us to see how these projects have actually performed. And looking at the numbers here, the average price gap between CCR and RCR in year 2020 was about 36.61%. And between RCR and OCR is actually about 28.71%. And between CCR and OCR, the gap was huge, 75.82%. Honestly, do you think there's a big gap? Especially for CCR versus OCR. And now let's compare this with today's market in 2026. And you can clearly see that the CCR versus RCR gap has narrowed significantly from 36.61 to 19.64%. And similarly for RCR versus OCR, it has reduced from 28.71% to 22.29%. And likewise for CCR versus OCR gap, right? The gap has dropped from 75.82% to 46.31%. So why am I so interested in this price gap? Because I wanted to find out whether buyers who paid significantly more for prime locations actually enjoy better returns. And to answer that, let's look at a few real-life examples in the next few slides. And if you are not sure whether a project pricing is considered safe, feel free to drop me a message. I'll be happy to help you compare the pricing against the surrounding projects and see whether you are entering at a reasonable level. So moving on to the first example, I'm comparing 4th Avenue Residences versus Park Esta, which is in RCR. 4th Avenue Residences is located in the CCR region, which is just directly connected to the 6th Avenue MRT. Location-wise, it's really hard to fault. When 4th Avenue Residences was launched, buyer was entering at 2,400 PSF. And that's actually in year 2019. At around the same period, Park Esta, which is located right opposite the Eunice MRT, was launching at around 1,006 per square feet. So this means that buyers were actually paying roughly 50% higher for 4th Avenue Residences. And most importantly, this 50% premium, right, was much higher than the average price gap between CCR and RCR, which was back then was 36.61%. So let me ask you, do you think paying 50% more was worthwhile? And if we take a look at the profitability, right, 4th Avenue Residences actually still make a respectable profit of about 377,000. However, in this case, Park Esta actually performed even better, with profits averaging from 780,000. The key takeaway here is simple. I'm not saying prime projects won't make money, but if the premium you're paying is too high, especially when it's much higher than the historical averages, your upside may become more limited. And this is exactly why I always tell my clients that buying in a good location alone is not enough. Entry price matters as well. And next, let's compare Den 3 residences, which is in RCR, versus the Florence residences, which is in OCR region. And these two projects were actually launched around the same period. And neither of these projects is particularly close to an MRT station. From what you can see from here, Den 3 was actually transacting at around 1,600 per square feet range, while Florence residences was selling at about 1,500 PSF range. And the price difference here between these two projects was only around 10% gap. And now remember, the average price gap between RCR and OCR back then in 2020 was around 28.7%. So if you can buy a city fringe project at only 10% more than an OCR project, that's generally considered a fairly safe entry point. And looking at their profits today, both projects performed reasonably well, but Den 3 actually did slightly better than Florence residences. And the last example that we're going to look at is the Copper at Newton, which is in CCR region, versus Treasure and Tampines in OCR region. And back in 2020, the average price gap between CCR and OCR was about 75.82%. And that's a huge gap. However, if you look at these two projects here, right, buyers at Copper at Newton were only paying 58% higher than the buyers at Treasure at Tampines. In other words, buyers were actually paying a premium for Copper at Newton, but it was actually much lower than the overall price gap between CCR and OCR. And now let's look at the profits. Interestingly, both projects deliver fairly similar returns. And what does this tell us? It tells us that paying more for a prime location isn't necessarily a bad thing. The key is whether you are overpaying if the premium you are paying is reasonable compared to the market average price gap. Your downside risk may be reduced. Okay, so the reason why I'm sharing this example is to show you a simple framework. Whenever I'm assessing a project, one of the first things that I look at is whether the premium I'm paying is justified. Of course, this isn't the only factor to consider, but it gives us a good starting point when evaluating whether a project pricing is attractive or not. So, after looking at historical examples, what about today's market of the recent launches? If we look at some of the recent launches in 2026, Pioneering Residences in Tampines has been transacting at around 2,546 per square foot, while Vela Bay has been transacting at 2,886 per square foot. At the same time, the average price gap between CCR and OCR in year 2026 has already narrowed significantly to 46.3%. And if we now assume Dunearn House is selling at an average of 3,000 per square foot, compared with Vela Bay, the price difference is only about 4% gap. And let me ask you, if you really like the Bukit Timah location, the schools and the MRT connectivity, would that be considered expensive? And personally, I think if Dunearn House launches around this price range, it could present an interesting opportunity for buyers who have always wanted to own a home in Bukit Timah area. And let's move on to the second myth. Many buyers believe that smaller units such as 1 and 2 bedroom units may not perform well in the Bukit Timah area. Traditionally, Bukit Timah has always been known as a family-oriented area, with many buyers preferring larger homes. So, is this concern valid? Let's look at some examples. So for this comparison, I look at Royal Green, 4th Avenue Residences and also 5th Avenue Condominium. Royal Green is actually a newer freehold project. 4th Avenue Residences is a newer 99 years leasehold project. And 5th Avenue Condominium is an older freehold project. Many agents will surely tell you that newer projects are always better because you get first mover advantage, right? And a lower quantum due to the smaller unit size. While it is true to some extent, but it isn't always the case. Bukit Timah is well known for its landed homes, greenery, and strong school catchment. And many families moving into this area are actually looking for bigger homes for their own stay. And if you are just buying purely for your own stay and you really like the project, then by all means go ahead. But if you are buying purely for investment, you may want to think carefully before choosing the smaller unit types. You can see from Royal Green and 4th Avenue residences that the profits from some of these smaller units were rather low because their 2-bedroom sizes ranges only from 600 over square feet to 800 square feet range. On the other hand, 5th Avenue condominium, despite being an older project in this vicinity, offer much larger bedroom sizes for the 2-bedroom unit, and the profit were actually significantly stronger than Royal Green and 4th Avenue residences. And if you ask me, for Bukit Timah, I would personally think twice before going for the smaller unit types. In this case, for 5th Avenue condominium, right, their 2-bedroom is actually with a larger floor plate of more than 1,300 square feet. And you can see the profit that they have made, right, is actually much higher than what we see in Royal Green and 4th Avenue residences. The 2-bedders owner says is actually making around 600 to 700,000 of profit here. So what's the key takeaways from all these examples here? Personally, I think buyers need to be very careful when choosing a unit types in Bukit Timah. If you are just buying purely for your own stay and you genuinely love the location, then buy the home that best suits your lifestyle and family needs. However, if you are just buying mainly for investment, I would pay extra attention to the floor plate and target buyer pool. Historically, many buyers in the Bukit Timah area prefer larger homes because of the strong family profile, proximity to good schools, and the landed housing environment. But this doesn't mean smaller units cannot make money. It's just that they are making lesser. But we cannot automatically assume the smaller units will always outperform simply because the quantum is lower. And at the end of the day, choosing the right unit is just as important as choosing the right project. Now, let's move on to another common assumption. Many buyers believe that future HDB residents in Turf City will naturally become the future buyers of Dunearn House. Okay, now I do believe this can eventually happen. However, one thing buyer needs to be careful about is the holding period. Because if you are buying today and relying mainly on future HDB upgraders within the Turf City itself, you may need to be prepared to hold for a much longer period. So who do you think is a potential buyers of Dunearn House in the future? First, existing private homeowners who want to move into the Bukit Timah vicinity will likely to be the one. And secondly, for those who would like to move near to the prestigious schools in this vicinity. Thirdly, for those buyers who really believe in the long-term transformation story of Turf City. And lastly, the HDB upgraders who want to move closer to the city area. And out of all these potential buyers, right, this is the group that I want to focus on today. If you are relying on the future BTO owners from Turf City itself, right, to support the demand, then it's important to understand the timeline. If we just assume the first HDB projects launches around 2027 to 2028, right, construction may only complete around 2032 to 2034 range. And if these flats are subjected to 10-year MOP period, right, which also means that the owners will only be able to sell and upgrade around 2042 to 2044 range. And that's approximately 15 to 18 years from today. So yes, future HDB upgraders could become a source of demand. But the buyers need to understand that this story itself may take a longer time to play out. And lastly, let's talk about a question that many buyers are asking. How much will Dunearn price? And interestingly, both River Modern and Dunearn House actually were acquired at almost identical land costs. River Modern was acquired at 1420, whereas Dunearn House was acquired at 1410. So if we use River Modern as a reference point, right, Dunearn House could potentially launch somewhere between a high 2,800 per square foot to a low 3,300 per square foot range. And of course, this is only just my personal estimate and the actual launch prices may vary. The developer will also look at the market sentiment and response of interest from the buyers during the preview period. But based on today's market condition, I think this could be a reasonable range to watch. Another interesting point to note that is that the land parcel beside Dunearn House was sold at 1,625 per square foot per plot ratio, and that's around $215 higher than the Dunearn House. And what this tells us is that developers remain very confident about a long-term potential of this area. In fact, the higher land bid also suggests the future launches nearby could potentially be priced even higher. So buyers who are entering earlier may enjoy some first mover advantage, assuming the transformation stories plays out as expected. So to conclude, Dunearn House is neither an obvious buy nor an obvious pass. The good schools, MRT connectivity, and prestigious Bukit Timah address already exist today. The real investment story lies in the transformation of the turf city. So if you believe this transformation can create enough value over the time, Dunearn House could potentially become one of the Singapore's more interesting first mover opportunities. However, buyers also need to be very mindful of the future supply that will gradually enter the market over the next few decades. As always, entry price, holding power, and choosing the right unit remains extremely important. Personally, I think Dunearn House is a project worth seriously looking at, especially if you genuinely like Bukit Timah location and able to have a longer investment horizon. The preview will take place on 10th of July 2026. So if you are considering Dunearn House and would like a personalized discussion on whether this project suits your needs, feel free to reach out to me.